Olivia had always liked her quiet life. After her divorce, she promised herself she would avoid drama, avoid emotional chaos, and focus on her work. Her small blue house at the end of Maple Street was perfect for that. Surrounded by neat hedges and friendly neighbors, it was her sanctuary. She spent her mornings in her garden, afternoons in front of her laptop designing graphics, and evenings curled up with a book, sipping tea. The days were predictable, calm, almost comforting in their routine. Yet, beneath that calm, there was a quiet ache she didn't always allow herself to feel. The house was too silent. The nights were too long. She sometimes reached for her phone, almost expecting messages that never came, almost hoping someone would check on her just to see that she was alive, that she was still herself. Across the street lived Ethan. He had moved in about 6 months ago. Olivia had noticed him from the moment he first arrived, struggling to carry boxes into the house while his dog barked at every passing car. He seemed polite, always waving when he saw her in the garden, always with a small, tired smile. Was something about his eyes that caught her attention, not just their color, a soft brown, but the way they held unspoken stories, the kind that only people who had known loss carried. Rumors had spread quickly in the neighborhood. His wife had left him 2 years earlier. Some said she had wanted freedom, some said he had been too closed off, but no one knew the details. Olivia didn't care for gossip, though. She had her own pain to manage. She simply observed him from her window, silently noting the way he watered the plants he barely had time to care for. The way he sometimes paused on the porch, staring into the distance as if waiting for something or someone to. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sky had turned a heavy gray. Dark clouds rolled in, and soon the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft at first, then faster. Olivia watched from her kitchen window as the rain started to blur the street. She liked rainy days. They had a calmness to them, a pause in the world that allowed her to breathe a little slower. Her laptop had been acting up, her designs lagging, but today she didn't mind. She had made herself a cup of coffee and was planning to simply watch the rain, enjoying the quiet. Then she saw him, Ethan, standing outside looking frustrated, his hands buried in his jacket pockets as he examined the electric meter beside his house. His hair was damp from the rain, his expression tense. Olivia felt a sudden pull of concern she wasn't expecting. She hesitated for a moment, debating whether she should just stay inside, keep her distance as she always had. But something in his posture told her he needed help. Something unspoken. Before she realized it, she was grabbing her umbrella and heading across the street. "Your lights are out," she said gently as she approached, keeping her voice soft, to match the patter of rain. He looked up, startled for a brief moment, then relaxed when he recognized her. "Yeah," he said, his voice low, almost tired. "I was just about to make coffee and noticed everything's gone." There was a short, awkward pause. Then, almost casually, he added, "I guess I'll have to wait until the storm passes." Olivia blinked at him, unsure why she felt a sudden warmth at his words. Then, without thinking, she said, "You can come over. I just made some coffee." The words sounded braver in her own ears than she expected. She almost immediately thought about retracting them. Inviting him into her home felt dangerous. Felt like stepping into a place she wasn't ready to go, a place where emotions could surface, where walls could be broken down. She had built these walls carefully over the last few years. She had learned to live without someone by her side, to survive the nights alone. But the small pause, the soft smile that spread across his face when she spoke, made it impossible to take the words back. "I'd like that," he said, his tone simple, yet something in it made her stomach tighten. It wasn't desire, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that hinted at unspoken connection. The kind of recognition that happens when two people, quietly wounded by life, finally meet and see themselves reflected in someone else. She led him inside. Her house smelled of fresh coffee and rain-dampened air from the garden. The living room was small but tidy. decorated with warm colors and soft cushions that invited comfort. Olivia offered him a seat while she poured the coffee. The silence was a strange companion, neither awkward nor heavy, but charged with a feeling she hadn't felt in years. They began with simple conversation. The rain tapped against the windows as they discussed mundane things, the weather, their work, the small happenings of the neighborhood. Olivia watched him closely, noting how his hands moved as he spoke, how his eyes occasionally darted to the window, almost as if he were searching for peace in the storm outside. She felt her own hands tremble slightly, though she wasn't sure. Why? There was a familiarity here, a strange sense of comfort in the presence of a stranger who wasn't truly a stranger. As the minutes passed, the conversation deepened naturally. Ethan spoke about his house, how quiet it felt at night, how the silence sometimes became unbearable. Olivia shared small truths as well, admitting how she sometimes felt the absence of a partner, how certain moments reminded her painfully of what she had lost. There was no judgment in his eyes, no condescension, just a shared understanding. Two people recognizing the loneliness in each other without words. The storm outside intensified, and Olivia felt the weight of the room pressing in softly. She got up to refill their cups, walking across the kitchen to the cabinet where she kept sugar and cream. She slipped slightly on the damp floor near the sink, and before she could react, Ethan's hand was on her arm, steadying her. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to shrink. Leaving just the two of them in that small kitchen, Olivia's heart raced. A sensation she hadn't felt in years, a mix of fear and excitement. It was not fear of danger, but fear of something she had almost forgotten: connection, closeness, attraction. She pulled her hand gently away, needing the safety of space, and whispered, "This is probably not a good idea." "Why?" he asked softly, genuinely confused. His gaze held hers, warm and patient. She didn't answer immediately, because she knew the truth, and it scared her. She was afraid of needing someone again, afraid of opening a door she had spent years keeping shut. But even as she tried to rationalize her feelings, she couldn't ignore the pull of something familiar, something comforting in his presence. Ethan's voice, low and steady, broke the tension. "I've wanted to come over for months." The words lingered, almost floating in the room with the aroma of coffee and the sound of rain. Olivia froze, unsure what to say, unsure how to process the admission. Months. That meant he had noticed. Her thought about her, maybe even cared. All without her realizing it. Her pulse quickened, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of something she had almost convinced herself she no longer needed. She looked at him, really looked at him. Why his hair fell slightly damp across his forehead. The way his eyes seemed to soften as he studied her expression. There was a sincerity there, a quiet honesty that disarmed her. And in that moment, Olivia realized that life had a way of surprising you. Even when you thought you had everything figured out. The rain continued to fall outside, relentless and steady. But inside, a new tension hummed in the air, a tension of possibilities, of choices not yet made, of emotions slowly unfolding. Olivia had crossed the street to offer a cup of coffee out of kindness. She had expected a brief interaction, a polite exchange, maybe a laugh or two. But what she found instead was a connection that felt almost electric. A recognition that two lonely hearts could, perhaps, find solace in each other. As Ethan sipped his coffee, Olivia realized that the storm outside mirrored something inside her, a storm of emotions she had buried for too long. She had been surviving, maintaining routines, keeping her walls high. But now those walls were being tested, challenged, by someone who seemed to understand her without needing explanations. And for the first time in years, Olivia wondered what it might feel like to let someone in. Truly, gently, without fear. The clock ticked, unnoticed, as they spoke quietly, sharing stories that were both ordinary and deeply revealing. Every word, every glance seemed to carry weight. Olivia caught herself laughing softly at things she hadn't laughed at in a long time. She noticed the small details, how he tilted his head when listening, how his hands moved when he described simple things, the faint way he frowned when recalling past regrets. All of it painted a picture of a man who was real, flawed, and unexpectedly tender. By the time the rain slowed, Olivia felt the afternoon had transformed. A simple coffee visit had become something unplanned, something that stirred feelings she thought were long gone. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know if this moment would last or fade into memory like so many others. But she knew one thing: her life had quietly shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. The rain had finally slowed, leaving the street wet and gleaming under the soft gray light of the late afternoon. Olivia stood by the kitchen window, watching Ethan's figure fade slightly across the street as he returned to his house. But she didn't feel relief or closure. Instead, her chest throbbed with something she hadn't expected, a strange mix of anticipation and curiosity. The brief encounter had stirred something inside her, something she had carefully kept buried for years. Her hands, still warm from holding the coffee cups, trembled slightly as she set them down on the counter. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't in a long time. Later that evening, as she cleared the dishes and put the kettle away, Olivia thought about the conversation they had shared. Simple things, yes, coffee. The storm lights going out, but the weight behind Ethan's words lingered. He had admitted he had wanted to visit her for months. Months. The idea that someone across the street had noticed her, thought about her, even cared, made her heart both heavy and light at the same time. It was a feeling she hadn't felt since before her divorce, before the nights of quiet despair had become routine. Olivia forced herself to shake her head and focus on mundane tasks, trying not to overthink what had happened. But every movement in the kitchen, every shadow cast by the fading light, reminded her of him. The next day, Olivia found herself walking past her window more often than usual. She caught herself looking toward Ethan's house, wondering if he might wave, wonder if he might notice her watching. She hated that she was thinking about him this much, yet she couldn't stop. Something about him had lodged itself inside her thoughts, refusing to be ignored. She busied herself with work, opening her laptop and forcing her hands to focus on the designs in front of her. But even the colors and shapes on the screen seemed muted compared to the memory of his smile, the sound of his voice, the way he had steadied her when she slipped. By the time evening came again, Olivia felt a restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the faint lights of the neighborhood flicker on. As dusk settled, that's when she noticed movement across the street. Ethan was outside again, carrying a small box of groceries. He seemed relaxed in a way he hadn't before, casual and ordinary, yet something about his presence made her pulse quicken. For a moment, their eyes met. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and she felt an unexpected thrill. It was just a nod, just acknowledgement, yet it carried a subtle invitation. An unspoken bridge between two people who had only just begun to notice each other. Later that evening, the thought of him lingered more persistently. Olivia realized that something inside her was shifting. She had been living cautiously, protecting herself, avoiding emotional risks. But now, the idea of Ethan visiting again didn't feel like a risk. It felt like possibility. It felt like hope. She tried to push it aside, reminding herself that she had been fine on her own for years, that she didn't need another person to disrupt her careful routine. Yet the memory of his warm eyes and the quiet intensity behind his words gnawed at her, and she found herself making excuses to go outside, to peek toward his home, to imagine him crossing the street again. A few days later, as Olivia was rearranging books on her shelf, there was a soft knock on her door. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the usual knock of a neighbor bringing borrowed sugar or asking a question about the mailbox. This felt different, hesitant, intentional. She set down the book, smoothed her hair, and walked to the door. heart hammering in her chest. There he stood, Ethan, holding a small plate with pastries he had baked himself. He smiled at her, that same gentle, knowing smile that seemed to reach directly to her heart. "I thought you might like these," he said simply. "I remembered you said you liked cinnamon." Olivia's lips curved into a small smile. "You remembered?" He nodded, a faint blush on his cheeks. "I pay attention." She stepped aside to let him in. The air inside her home seemed to shift, charged with a quiet tension that neither of them tried to ignore. He placed the plate on the table, and for a moment they both stood there, unsure of how to continue. The room was filled with soft smells. Coffee she had made earlier, the faint sweetness of his pastries, and something unnameable that seemed to linger between them. They sat down across from each other, and this time the conversation moved more freely. They talked about books, they liked movies they had seen, the little annoyances of daily life. But beneath the surface, there was something more. Every glance carried a subtle question. Every laugh carried warmth that lingered. Olivia found herself leaning in slightly, drawn to him despite the walls she had built. She realized that the fear she had felt the first time he visited had not disappeared, but it had softened, replaced with curiosity and a hesitant longing. At one point, the conversation turned to their pasts. Ethan spoke about his life before the divorce, the challenges he had faced, and the emptiness that had followed. Olivia listened, feeling a strange mix of empathy and recognition. She understood the ache he described because it mirrored her own. When she shared her own story, it was in small fragments enough to reveal her vulnerability without exposing every wound. He listened without judgment, his eyes reflecting understanding, and Olivia felt a relief she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly understood. Without the need for pretense, as the evening wore on, a quiet comfort settled between them. They moved closer naturally, drawn by the shared space, by the gentle rhythm of conversation, by the subtle acknowledgement of something neither wanted to name just yet. The room felt smaller, warmer, more intimate, even though neither had acted on the growing tension. Olivia noticed how his hand brushed slightly against hers when reaching for a pastry. How his gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary. There was no rush, no forcefulness, just a gentle, mutual recognition of the connection growing between them at one point. The lights flickered slightly as the evening deepened, and Olivia's hand slipped while she reached for the sugar. Ethan caught her arm before she could lose balance, steadying her effortlessly. Their faces were close for a heartbeat, and the world seemed to shrink around them. Olivia felt her pulse race, the same sensation she had felt the first time he visited, but stronger now. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something more, a combination of longing, nervous excitement, and the stirring of feelings she had convinced herself she no longer had. She pulled back slightly, trying to regain composure, and whispered, "I think I need a moment." Ethan didn't move away. Instead, he smiled gently, understandingly, and said nothing. His presence was steady, reassuring, and Olivia felt the tension ease slightly. She realized that this closeness, this unspoken understanding, was something she wanted, something she had been avoiding because of past hurt. And yet, even as she acknowledged it, she felt a twinge of fear. She had been hurt before. She had been left. She knew the pain of misplaced trust. But with Ethan, the fear was tempered by a sense of possibility. A quiet hope that maybe this time could be different. The conversation drifted back to lighter topics. But the unspoken connection remained. They laughed softly, exchanged small glances, and shared subtle smiles that carried more meaning than words could express. Olivia noticed the way he seemed to notice everything about her, the way she brushed her hair, the way she moved her hands while speaking, the little hesitations that revealed vulnerability. It was comforting and thrilling at the same time. As the evening turned into night, the quiet intimacy between them grew. They weren't speaking in confessions or declarations, but in the small, meaningful ways that mattered most. Olivia realized that she had spent too long hiding behind routine, protecting herself from life and love. But now, in the gentle warmth of her kitchen, she felt a shift. The walls she had built were no longer impenetrable. They had softened under the weight of connection, under the gentle pressure of shared experience and mutual understanding. Ethan finally stood to leave, gathering his plate and offering her a small, soft smile. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. "I didn't want to overstep, but I'm glad I did." Olivia nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm glad too," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. The simple truth hung in the air between them, unadorned yet profound. As he stepped outside into the quiet night, Olivia watched him go. She felt a flutter of emotion that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this was the start of something real or just a fleeting moment that would fade into memory. But she did know one thing: the ordinary had become extraordinary. The quiet had become charged, and her heart was waking up in ways it hadn't for years. She closed the door gently behind him and leaned against it for a moment, breathing deeply. For the first time in a long time, Olivia allowed herself to imagine a future that included someone else, a forced future, not a desperate one, but one where possibility existed, quietly, gently, just on the other side of a cup of coffee. The night had fallen quietly over Maple Street, leaving the houses glowing softly from the warm light of their lamps. Olivia sat in her living room, a cup of coffee untouched in her hand, her thoughts spinning in circles. The memory of Ethan's visit the night before lingered like a gentle ache in her chest. She replayed their conversation, the laughter they shared, the subtle touches, and the way he had looked at her with an honesty she hadn't seen in years. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. She had spent so long building walls to protect herself from being hurt, but now those walls seemed fragile, almost unnecessary. For the first time, she wondered if she was ready to take the risk. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She hesitated, a flicker of nerves running through her. Could it really be him again? Her heart raced as she walked toward the door, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. There he stood, holding a small envelope in his hands, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I wanted to bring this," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that immediately put her at ease. Olivia took the envelope, curiosity mingling with apprehension. "What is it?" she asked, trying to mask her racing heart. "It's something I thought you might like," he replied with a small smile. "Just a little note." She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten message, simple but meaningful. "You've made my days brighter. I don't want to let this fade." Olivia's fingers trembled as she read it. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the depth of her feelings. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. There was no rush, no urgency, only a calm presence that filled the room with warmth. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other, each waiting for the other to speak. The silence was heavy but comforting, a rare pause in a world that often demanded answers before hearts were ready to give them. Olivia set the note on the table and took a deep breath. "You've been so patient," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone." Her voice faltered slightly, but she didn't stop. She had spent years running from vulnerability, and now it was too late to turn back. She could feel it in every heartbeat, every breath. This was real. Ethan took a small step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I wanted to be here," he admitted. "I didn't want to rush anything, but I couldn't stay away either. You've changed something in me, Olivia. I don't want to ignore it." Her heart lifted at his words. They weren't grand or dramatic, but they were true. Honesty had a weight that gestures often lacked, and she felt it settle between them like a bridge connecting two weary hearts. She realized that for the first time in a long while, she didn't need to hide her feelings. She didn't need to Guard against disappointment or fear. There was a space here, gentle and steady, where she could let herself feel again. They sat down together, closer than before. The room seemed smaller, more intimate, as if the world outside had disappeared entirely. Ethan reached for her hand across the table, and this time she didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch grounded her, gave her courage, made her realize how much she had missed connection, closeness. It's the simple act of being seen by another person. For hours, they talked. It's not about grand gestures or future plans, but about the little things, the way the sunlight hit the street in the morning, the small pleasures in their day-to-day lives, the memories that had shaped them. Olivia felt a connection she hadn't felt in years, a sense that she could finally share the parts of herself she had kept hidden. Ethan listened with patience, his eyes reflecting understanding and compassion. And she realized that she had been starving for this kind of attention, this kind of presence. As the night deepened, they found themselves sitting closer still, drawn by the quiet intimacy that had grown naturally between them. There was no rush, no need for dramatic confessions, only the slow, steady unfolding of something new and fragile. Olivia noticed every detail, the way he shifted slightly when he spoke, the soft tone of his voice, the faint smile that lingered even when they weren't talking. Each small gesture carried meaning, and she felt herself responding instinctively, opening to him in ways she hadn't allowed in years. At one point, the conversation paused, and Ethan reached out again, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It was such a small action, but it sent a shiver through her. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from something deeper, a longing, a recognition, a desire to be close without needing to rush or demand. She looked at him, searching his eyes, and saw a reflection of her own emotions mirrored back. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. Ethan's hand covered hers, steady and reassuring. "You don't have to be," he replied. "Not with me. Not now." The simplicity of his words struck her. She realized that fear had been her constant companion for years, shaping her choices, limiting her, keeping her isolated. But in this moment, fear felt distant, almost irrelevant. She could feel the possibility of happiness, of connection, of trust, growing inside her like a fragile flame waiting to catch. They talked until the clock ticked late into the night, sharing stories, laughter, and the quiet moments between words. Olivia felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. She realized that life wasn't meant to be spent in solitude, guarding against hurt. It was meant to be shared, experienced, felt fully, even if it meant risking disappointment. And here, with Ethan, she felt that possibility. She felt the chance to rebuild, to trust, to love cautiously, but genuinely. As the night drew to a close, Ethan stood, preparing to leave. Olivia felt a pang of longing, but also a sense of calm. He wasn't leaving her, not really. He was leaving with a promise, unspoken but understood. "I'll see you soon," he said softly, brushing his thumb across her hand before letting go. She nodded, a small, shy smile on her lips. "Soon," she echoed. Once he stepped out into the quiet night. Olivia closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. She felt a mix of relief, anticipation, and warmth. The ordinary had become extraordinary again. Single visit, a cup of coffee, a simple conversation had shifted something fundamental inside her. She realized that life didn't always need dramatic gestures or grand confessions to change. It could change in quiet, subtle ways, leaving the heart open to possibilities it had long forgotten. In the following days, Olivia found herself noticing Ethan more. She caught glimpses of him as he worked in his garden, waving to her from across the street, and she felt a thrill each time. Their conversations became more frequent, filled with gentle teasing, shared jokes, and quiet confidences. Each interaction was a step forward, a chance to rebuild trust and connection. She noticed herself laughing more easily, breathing more freely, than feeling a sense of joy that had been absent for years. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light across her living room, Ethan appeared at her door again. This time, he carried nothing but himself, a quiet smile on his face. Olivia felt her chest tighten with anticipation and excitement. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied. Feeling a warmth spread through her, they sat together closer than ever before, letting the conversation flow naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just two people exploring the space between friendship and something deeper. Olivia realized that this gentle unfolding, this quiet connection, was what she had been waiting for without even knowing it. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew steadily. Olivia found herself sharing things she had kept secret for years: memories, hopes, fears, and small dreams. Ethan listened, never interrupting, never judging, only offering understanding and kindness. She realized that trust could grow slowly, carefully, without being forced. And she began to feel the stirrings of love, soft and steady, unthreatened by the past or by fear. One evening, as they shared a quiet cup of tea by the window, Olivia turned to him. "I think I'm ready," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ready to feel, to try, to let someone in." Ethan's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand. "I've been ready," he replied. "I just wanted to make sure you were too." Her heart swelled at his words. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about being seen, understood, and valued. It was about two people choosing each other gently, patiently, and with care. She realized that the world didn't have to change to bring happiness. It only took the courage to open a door, the willingness to step inside, and the choice to trust again. As the night deepened, Olivia and Ethan sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts quietly aligned. The storm of fear and loneliness that had once defined their lives had subsided, replaced by a calm, steady warmth. Olivia understood that life's most profound changes didn't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrived quietly, gently, in moments of shared laughter, mutual understanding, and the courage to let someone into your heart. And in that quiet moment, Olivia realized something she had long forgotten. She had never seen it coming, but perhaps she had been waiting for it all along. A cup of coffee, a rainy afternoon, and the simple choice to open the door had transformed her life. And as she looked at Ethan, she knew that this, whatever it would become, was worth every risk, every fear, and every heartbeat that had led her to this moment.